So we have to understand why people would oppose Amanullah Khan. Why would these people like Gurdmullah, why would these tribes want to oppose this enlightened and modern and progressive and magnificent King Amanullah Khan? The official narrative is that it was all a conspiracy by the evil British Empire who wanted to overthrow Afghanistan's independent kingdom. But we need to understand the motives of the people who would want to oppose the state. Because people, even right now, if we look at the current situation in Afghanistan, we have people either on the side of the government or people on the side of Taliban. So there is always a reason for people to be opposed to the state. And if you want to resolve problems, you have to understand why people, what motivates people to join any kind of insurrection. And in this case, as we know here in Western societies, we know one of the most historic slogans is no taxation without representation. It's something that was chanted by the people in the colonies in the past, because the people who lived in the colonies, you know, white settlers, they were forced to pay taxes to the colonial regime without having any say in the decision making. So they felt like they were being exploited. And in Afghanistan, we had a state which was very primitive, very small. It didn't provide any services. It didn't provide any security. There was no infrastructure or anything of that sort. But the people in the tribal areas, but also in other parts of the country, they were forced to pay taxes and send their boys, send their sons to become soldiers serving this king. So obviously, in a situation like that, it makes sense that certain people will say, you know what, I'm not going to play along.
Exactly. So I think, like I said, the coverage on Amanullah is hijacked in terms of the secular religious binary. And don't get me wrong, I mean, of course, there were many people who used religion to justify their insurrection. And, you know, we had Mullah Lang going around asking people if they preferred the Nizamnama or the Quran. But at the same time, there were very practical reasons to oppose the Nizamnama. I've got the reference here as well. Asker Christensen, in her book, it said that land taxes went up 4 times under Amanullah Khan. Livestock taxes went up 2 to 5 times. So Amanullah Khan, and this is one of the other things, and it's also related to his war with the British. After the war with the British, in order to keep Afghanistan to keep Afghanistan as a protectorate, the British would pay a subsidy of millions of pounds to the ruler of Kabul. Well, when Afghanistan became independent, it lost that subsidy. So Amanullah needed a way to raise revenue elsewhere, and he did that by raising taxes. But not only did he raised taxes on communities that were previously totally independent, totally autonomous. He also forced them to join the army, like you said, and he also started regulating their marital affairs. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think anyone can object to child marriage being outlawed. Even like we said, according to Islam, child marriage is not allowed. The enforcement on 4 wives being the limit, I don't think most of us would say that that's necessarily a very bad thing, but there are other very practical reasons here that are generally overlooked. So these are the reasons for which the Khost rebellion kicks off. It's centered in Khost. It's led by Mullah Lang. And eventually, the Afghan Air Force is deployed for the first time against Afghanistan's own citizens and inhabitants. About 1,000 men of the Mangal tribe are killed. Shockingly, for the secular feminist that Amanullah was, 600 women of the Mangal tribe were dragged off to Kabul. If anyone wants to check, Nafisur Rahman tweeted an excerpt to this, and he's quoted the book in the thread. 600 Mangal women were dragged off to Kabul. I don't actually know what happened to them. But yeah, so this is the Mullah Lang was blown out of a cannon, and Amanullah did a backtrack on the Nizamnama after a lawyer Jirga essentially amended many of its stipulations. So, and also worth noting that in order for a scapegoat to be used, Mawlawi Abdul Wasi was also imprisoned by Amanullah for a year because of the whole fiasco that surrounded the Nizamnama and the Khost rebellion.
Yeah, so let me just... I need to let that sink in. You know, the idea that an Afghan king went in and took 600 women as captives, you know, even by today's standards, that's shocking. That's absolutely shocking. And I must say, I think that it's really embarrassing to not know these historic facts. Like for instance, we hear so many things like the glorification and celebration of Amanullah Khan, but at the same time we are not told that this is also a very dark side of who he was and how he ruled.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think that encapsulates it perfectly. And I think that one of the most important things, like I said, is that in a topic where there's such a binary painted, it's to do justice to the topic. And that isn't, it's to provide justice for all of the actors involved. To give a fair, nuanced and balanced account. So far what we've got is that 1923, when the Nizamnama is announced, there are religious proponents of it, and there are religious there is religious opposition to it. A rebellion kicks off, and in that rebellion, it's framed in overtly religious terms. However, there are underlying very practical reasons to oppose the Nizamnama, and it actually reflects some level of political immaturity to announce such sweeping changes in a country that was not used to any semblance of government. And on top of that, the way that this rebellion was put down, the rebellion was pretty damaging to Amanullah because it went on for quite a while and it exposed the weakness of his army, which he also tried to reform unsuccessfully. The army was weakened as a result of his reforms, and he had to resort to tribal lashkars, whose existence he was initially opposed to, but I believe it was Momans and Afridis that went into Paktia, did the fighting. Mullah Lang was blown out of a cannon, Mangal women were taken captive, and thus the rebellion ended. Amanullah accepted the amendments of the lawyer Jirga to the Nizamnama, and I think after this we could say that he was discouraged but not at all put off, because like I said, this is the part of his reign where we could say he was acting within the framework of Islam. And after this, things changed.
Before we go further into his reign, can you briefly tell us more about a very, very obscure character by the name of Mahmud Tarzi?
So Mahmud Tarzi was also a Mohammedzai. And he was exiled.
Wasn't he originally from Ghazni?
He was born in Ghazni, but I believe he was from a branch of the Mohammedzai family that were in Kandahar at the time. So the royal clan are sort of separated between Kabul and Kandahar. Mahmud Tarzi was born in Ghazni. He is seen as the father of modern Afghan journalism. He was an intellectual, he was a poet, he was a modernist. So he very much saw that modernization in terms of a nation state and an organized government and this sort of thing was something that was not just encouraged, something to be encouraged for Muslims, was something that was necessary. He was exiled by Amanullah's grandfather Abdurrahman. He was invited back. He became the father-in-law of Amanullah, and he was an intellectual, but he was very much focused. And one thing to mention here is that he was influenced by the Young Turk movement in Turkey, in Ottoman Turkey, and he started the Young Afghans, where ideas of nationalism were imported into Afghanistan, in which there needed to be one nation, one language, that sort of thing, a very Westphalian understanding of a political unit. And being reform-minded, he actually encouraged Amanullah a lot, but became very disillusioned with Amanullah because he thought that the economic and the social backbone was needed in the country to put forward these reforms, whereas Amanullah was being too hasty, too rash, and immature about these things.
How much do you know about his association with the Freemasons? Because there are stories about
Not much
Mahmoud
at all.
Tarzi. Okay, so maybe we'll have to dedicate an entire episode to Mahmoud Tarzi, because there are some books suggesting that he was involved in Freemasonry.
Well, I don't really know what to say about that, to be honest.
Okay,
I didn't know
yeah.
that, but yeah, if you...
Yeah, so
which books are these?
We have to. I'm going to. We will discuss this in another show, because otherwise we'll sidetrack. But basically, Mahmoud Tarzi, like many other secular ideologues from colonized countries, such as Afghanistan, they seem to be very much influenced by Western thought. And there are theories circulating about these people as being also part of the Freemason fraternity. So